Our faith calls us to create peace, yet we confess that we have not done all we could to prevent the spread of armed conflict throughout the world. At times, we have lacked the courage to speak and act against violence and injustice. At times, we have lacked the creativity to speak and act in constructive ways. And at times, we have condemned the violence of others without acknowledging our own complicity in violence. We affirm a responsibility to speak truth to power, especially when unjust power is exercised by our own nation. Too often, we have allowed our disagreements to distract us from all that we can do together. This statement of conscience challenges individual Unitarian Universalists as well as our congregations and association to engage with more depth, persistence, and creativity in the complex task of creating peace. At this time, we'll have the lighting of the candles of community. You can light a candle for a joy or a concern or simply to bring more light into this space together.
Last night I had the strangest dream I never dreamed before. I dreamed the world had all agreed to put an end to war. I dreamed I saw a mighty room. The room was full of men, and the paper they were signing said they'd never fight again. And when the paper was all signed and 1,000,000 copies made, they all joined hands and bowed their heads, and grateful prayers were prayed. And the people in the streets below were dancing round and round, and swords and guns and uniforms were scattered on the ground. Last night I had the strangest dream. Last night I had the strangest dream I never dreamed before. I dreamed the world had all agreed. Dreamed the world had all agreed to put an end to war.
Let us stand in body or spirit for the lighting of the chalice and our spoken affirmation. We light this chalice to find inner peace, love for each other, and faith in ourselves. Also to be welcoming to whomever we meet and kind to all living creatures. So gather around this light of hope as we share this time together. Let us join in the spoken affirmation. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in freedom, and to help one another. You may be seated. Our opening thought comes from the Reverend Mr. Fred Rogers. When I say it's you I like. When I say it's you I like, I'm talking about that part of you that knows that life is far more than anything you can ever see or hear or touch. That deep part of you that allows you to stand for those things without which humankind cannot survive. love that conquers hate, peace that rises triumphant over war, and justice that proves more powerful than greed.
About a problem and how with good old American ingenuity, some people attempt to solve it. The song is called The Draft Dodger Rag. Count it off, George.
Oh, I'd prefer not.
Dickie, you count it off.
No, you'd count it off, Tommy. You're the one with the natural rhythm. You're the great musician.
Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Now, we're just typical American boys from a typical American town. We believe in God and Senator Dodd and keeping old Castro down.
And when it came our time to serve, we knew better dead than red.
But when we got to the draft board, buddy, this is what we said.
Oh, well, I'm only 18, I got a rough shit spleen, and I always carry a purse. Got eyes like a bat, and my feet are flat, and my asthma's getting worse. Oh, when I think of my career, and my sweetheart dear, and my poor old invalid aunt. Besides, I ain't no fool, I'm going to school, and I'm working in a defense plant. Got a dislocated disc and a cracked up back. I'm allergic to flowers and bugs.
And when a bombshell hits, I get psychedelic fits. I'm addicted to 1,000 drugs. When the weakness flows, I can't touch my toes. I can hardly touch my knees. And if the enemy came close to me, friend, why, I'd probably sneeze.
Well, I'm only 18, got a rough shit spleen, and I always carry a purse. Got eyes like a bat, and my feet are flat, and my asthma's getting worse. When I'm thinking my career, and my sweetheart dear, and the poor old invalid aunt. Besides, I ain't no fool, I'm going to school, and I'm working in a defense plant.
Now, Ho Chi Minh sure ain't no friend. That's plain for all to see.
And I know someone's got a fight over there, but why does it have to be me?
So I wish you well, Sarge. Give 'em heck. I'm bound for Canada, you know.
And if you ever get a war without blood and gore, boy, I'll be the first to go. But until then, Mr. McNamara.
I'm only 18, I got a rough shit spleen, and I always carry a purse. I got eyes like a bat, and my feet are flat, and my asthma's getting worse. Oh, when I think of my career, and my sweetheart dear, and my poor old invalid aunt. Besides, I ain't no fool, I'm going to school, and I'm working in a defense plant. Make love, not war.
The Smothers Brothers. Our next reading comes from Wimberly, The Peace of Wild Things. When despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound, in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests, in his beauty on the water, and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things, who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. For a time I rest in the grace of the world and am free. Let us join together for a time of meditation. Let us find a comfortable way of sitting and breathe in. And out. In and out. When great trees fall, rocks on distant hills shudder. Lions hunker down in tall grasses, and elephants lumber after safety. When great trees fall in forests, small things recoil into silence, their senses eroded beyond fear. When great souls die, the air around us becomes light, rare, sterile. We breathe briefly. Our eyes briefly see with a hurtful clarity. Our memory, suddenly sharpened, examines, gnaws on kind words unsaid, promised walks never taken. Great souls die, and our reality, bound to them, takes leave of us. Our souls, dependent upon their nurture, now shrink, wizened. Our minds, formed and informed by their radiance, fall away. We are not so much maddened as reduced to the unutterable ignorance of dark, cold caves. And when great souls die, after a period, peace blooms, slowly and always irregularly. Spaces fill with a kind of soothing electric vibration. Our senses restored, never to be the same, whisper to us. They existed. They existed. We can be and be better, for they existed. Our next reading is from Being Peace by Thich Nhat Hanh. If we are peaceful, if we are happy, we can smile and blossom like a flower. And everyone in our family, our entire society, will benefit from our peace.
There will be a human race here in a few hundred years if you and I work together in some way and find a way to teach others to work together. When we look and we see things are not what they should be, God's counting on me, God's counting on you. When we look and we see things are not what they should be, God's counting on me, God's counting on you. Hoping we'll all pull through, hoping we'll all pull through, hoping we'll all pull through, me and you. Time to turn things around, trickle up, not trickle down. God's counting on me, God's counting on you. Time to turn things around, trickle up, not trickle down. God's counting on me, God's counting on you. Hey, sing it with us. Hoping we'll all pull through, hoping we'll all pull through, hoping we'll all pull through, me and you. Oh, some of you are singing real good, but some are preserving their academic objectivity. Yes, when drill, baby drill, turns to spill, baby spill, God's counting on me, God's counting on you. Yes, when drill, baby drill, turns to spill, baby spill, God's counting on me, God's counting on you. Hoping we'll all pull through, hoping we'll all pull through, hoping we'll all pull through, me and you. When there's big problems to be solved, let's get everyone involved. God's counting on me, God's counting on you. When there's big problems to be solved, let's get everyone involved. God's counting on me, God's counting on you. Here we go. Hoping we'll all pull through, hoping we'll all pull through, hoping we'll all pull through, me and you. Don't give up, don't give in. Working together, we all can win. God's counting on me, God's counting on you. Don't give up, don't give in. Working together, we all can win. God's counting on me, God's counting on you. Hoping we'll all pull through, hoping we'll all pull through, hoping we'll all pull through, me and you. What we do now, you and me, will affect eternity. God's counting on me, God's counting on you. What we do now, you and me, will affect eternity. God's counting on me, God's counting on you. Hoping we'll all pull through, hoping we'll all pull through, hoping we'll all pull through, me and you. I sing with the kids in my hometown. When we work with younger folks, we can never give up hope. God's counting on me, God's counting on you. Yes, when we work with younger folks, we can never give up hope. God's counting on me, God's counting on you. Hoping we'll all pull through, hoping we'll all pull through, hoping we'll all pull through, me and you. Sing it again. Hoping we'll all pull through, hoping we'll all pull through, hoping
My dad saw Pete Seeger sing at the University of Oklahoma in the mid-1950s. The fact that he was allowed to sing at the University of Oklahoma in the mid-1950s is itself a miracle of sorts. You may know the words that are on Pete Seeger's banjo. This machine surrounds hate and forces it to surrender. Woody Guthrie had a similar quote on his guitar about fascists. Each generation seems to find ways to perpetuate war in our world, leading us to wonder if true peace will ever be possible. Today, I'm going to explore the factors and the conditions that might bring us to an experience of a more peaceful and a more just world. We'll look at the question, what will it take to move in the direction of perpetual peace rather than perpetual war? You're doing a lot of peace this month, I see, not only in the 2 discourses that I've been doing on peace, but also in some other series of discourses on peace here as well. And a number of times you've heard the name Thich Nhat Hanh, the Vietnamese Buddhist monk, who believed that peace in the world begins with each of us being peace in the world. Peace in the world begins with each of us being peace in the world. This entails finding ways to be at peace with ourselves and learning to be as fully present to ourselves and to each other in the moment, and letting go of those appetites and desires that can easily lead to conflict, not only conflict with other humans, but also with non-human life as well. Meditation, mindfulness, compassion, a commitment in our personal lives to socially engaged nonviolence, and simple living are the beginning of cultivating peace in our world. Along with so many other champions of peace like Dorothy Day, Martin Luther King Jr., Mohandas Gandhi, Wangara Maathai, and others, Thich Nhat Hanh understood that peace in the world begins with peace within ourselves. But all of these prophets of peace also understood that peace requires a transformation of the world, a transformation of the systems that perpetuate the injustices that are at the core of conflict and war. It's critically important to speak out against and protest unnecessary and unjust wars in the world, but protests are most often reactions to war and violence that have either already begun or for which the conditions have been building so as to make violence nearly inevitable. In addition to protests to current violence, an effective peace movement grounded in a commitment to nonviolence will learn from the past and work to prevent the conditions that lead to the perpetuation of war and violence, both in the present and in the future. During the time of the war in Vietnam, Martin Luther King Jr. pointed to the triple evils of racism, economic injustice, and militarism as being the 3 great enemies of creating a beloved community, both in our nation and in our world. If we cannot find ways to see ourselves as all being of equal value and dignity, true peace will never be possible. If we cannot find ways to correct gross inequities in income and equality and wealth, true peace will never be possible. And if we cannot regulate, control, and diminish the power of the military-industrial complex that profits trillions of dollars from the preparation and the implementation of war, true peace will never be possible. And when we realize that we are currently seeing yet another expression of white backlash here in our society with attacks on integrated public education and attacks on honest discussions about racism in our past and our present, when we see that the gap between the rich and the poor and income inequality are as bad, if not worse, than they were in the Gilded Age, and when we continue to spend trillions of dollars on the weapons and ways of war while spending a pittance on perpetuating peace or on eradicating poverty, it is no wonder that we are still so far from a culture of peace. It is no wonder that we are so ready to turn to war and violence when the triple evils of racism, economic injustice, and militarism are waxing rather than waning in strength due to our inaction to address their dangerous and violent power in our world. It should come as no surprise that in the midst of so much racism, inequality, and militarism in the world, that autocratic political leaders find fertile ground for their seeds of propaganda, and that they find millions of followers who are ready to accept false solutions that actually fan the flames of racism, inequality, and militarism rather than extinguish them. And autocrats who come to power are much more willing to use military force and violence to maintain and expand their power, as they use force to bend others to their will rather than working for the well-being of all people. If autocracy wins the day over democracy in the world, we will experience a much more violent and war-filled future. In addition to the triple evils of racism, poverty, and militarism, we now face a fourth evil that exacerbates the other three, and that not only threatens peace, but also the very existence of human civilization as we currently know it. The evil of environmental degradation and the climate crisis that it has created exacerbates our tendency towards racist nationalism, widens the gap between the rich and the poor even more, as those in poverty are affected most detrimentally by the climate crisis, and increases the likelihood of ongoing and worsening military conflict as we compete with each other in a dystopic war of survival of our own making. Without climate justice that preserves a stable and livable climate for all, any future peace will be fragile and fleeting. A future of justice and peace in beloved community can only be won through intentional cultivation of peace within ourselves, combined with the transformation of racist, economically unjust, militaristic, and environmentally destructive systems that perpetuate war and violence in our world. Without the intentional cultivation for peace within ourselves, we will be unlikely to maintain the commitment that is necessary to transform our unjust systems. But without transforming our unjust systems, our attempts to make war no more become futile. But the good news, there is good news. The good news is that there is hope for a more peaceful world. There is hope for a more peaceful future, and that hope is being lived out now. It's being lived out now, even in the midst of a war-torn world, and it provides a model for the possibility of peace. The evidence is overwhelming that the more fully democratic a society becomes, the more adequately and effectively it addresses the underlying evils, the underlying injustices that are contributing to war and to violence. For a variety of reasons, vibrant, full democracies are less racist, less sexist, more economically just, less militaristic, and more ecologically sustainable. The evidence seems clear that the path to peace is the path of democracy, and not the path of autocracy. Now, when we hear this, one major objection may come to our minds. If the path to peace is through democracy, how is it that our society in the United States, which sees itself as the world's champion of democracy, is also one of the most, if not the most, militaristic society in the world, spending more money on our military than the next 9 countries combined? Some might answer that this is the price of making the world safe for democracy. This is the cost. But I would suggest that the more accurate answer is that we are so militaristic, not because we are the world's champion of democracy, but because we are a deeply flawed democracy. We are not a full democracy. And those who benefit from the deep flaws in our democracy continue to perpetuate those flaws in order to maintain and expand their economic power, both here in the United States and around the world. And they use military power to protect their economic interests, with the result that the United States functions more as a global economic empire rather than as a model of a full and vibrant democracy. So perhaps the most important thing that those of us here in the United States can do to work for a more peaceful world is to do all that we can to both protect and improve our democracy here at home. Because as the rest of the world is teaching us, the more fully democratic societies become, the less violent and militaristic they become. Because happy, healthy, and well-educated people in democratic societies who enjoy greater equality of opportunity are much less likely to engage in the use of war and violence to solve their problems, because they know through experience that the nonviolent democratic processes of their society are much more fruitful and much more effective. The path to peace, though challenging, is clear. It is the path of anti-racist, economically just, anti-militaristic, and ecologically sustainable democracy. And this path is only possible. It's only possible if we ward off the clear and present threats to democracy we are currently experiencing. Unless democracy overcomes autocracy, peace for both people and the planet will continue to be in peril. At this time, those who wish may bring their gifts to the table, and there are also opportunities to give online.
There is a love holding all that we
Our parting thought comes to us from Mohandas Gandhi, from his autobiography, The Story of My Experiments with Truth. Remember that all through history, there have been tyrants and murderers, and for a time, they seem invincible, but in the end, they always fall, always. Let us join together as we extinguish the chalice, and let's remain seated for the postlude today. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.